All right, well, we're going to continue on. We're going to review what we left off on Sunday. We'll see if you guys were paying attention, Miss Carol.
He also picks something.
I do. I picked on you quite a bit, don't I?
Miss Carol. All the
I
time.
always pick on the people I like.
Oh, thank you.
What is a miracle? I know we didn't leave off on this on Sunday, but I just came across this article as I was doing some of my preparing. But what is a miracle?
Supernatural occurrence.
Supernatural occurrence. Something outside of nature, right? So a miracle is an event that is incomprehensible by nature or scientific laws and accordingly gets credited to some supernatural or unnatural cause. Do atheists believe in miracles?
They say they don't, but
I
agree they do.
My neighbor is a skeptic. He doesn't believe in miracles. He said that if you want me to believe in God, he could come out here and part these trees and I would believe in him. That's what he said. But they don't believe in God, miracles. I don't think atheists do. But let's see. For many years, biologists assumed that the emergence of complex life was an evolutionary certainty. Once simple life emerged, it gradually evolved into more complex forms, eventually giving rise to animals and plants. But that doesn't seem to be what happened. And this is coming from a science website, Darwinist, evolutionist website. They're still, Miss Carol, still trying to figure out how life emerged. After cells first appeared, there was an extremely long pause, nearly half the lifetime of the planet before complex ones evolved. In fact, it appears that simple cells gave rise to complex ones just once. In 4 billion years of evolution, which is suggestive of a freak accident. So we have just once happening, freak accident. All eukaryotic, and that's any multicellular organism, plant or animal, anything that has more than one cell is eukaryotic, evolved from the same ancestor. Without that one-off event, life would still be stuck in its rut. Bacteria cells just don't have what it takes to evolve into more complex forms. So what happened? The critical event appears to have occurred about 2 billion years ago when one simple cell somehow, Miss Carol, ended up inside another. Just somehow. Also, this seems to have hinged on a single fluke event, the attainment of one simple cell by another. The bottom line is that while simple life appears to be a near certainty, the evolution of complex life, including you and yours, is fantastically unlikely. And here is where we're going to end. And this is what this article says, Miss Carol. That is the true miracle of life on earth. Can you make sense of an atheist so-called miracle? It goes by faith. Now, Kyle said that a miracle is supernatural events outside nature, yet this particular article is telling us that, well, we can't figure it out. We don't know how. It's one-off event, so it must be some type of a miracle. Very interesting, because again, like we said, a week from last Wednesday, does anyone know how that first simple cell came to be? No, not at all. So evolution, facts or fiction? Is evolution true? Now, Miss Carol, remember we left with this last Sunday. Is evolution true? No. And what, Aaron?
Yes.
And yes.
No and yes.
No and yes. Explain. All right, this is the review. This is the review. Explain how it can be not true, but also true.
Because we do see examples of small changes amongst life on this earth. There's small, micro evolutionary traits.
Micro evolution. What's the other evolution we talked about Sunday? Macro. Jonathan had to correct me because I said macro when I meant micro at one point. So this is the slide I showed Sunday, Miss Carol. We have all these different organisms evolving from amoeba. This is what we call the tree of life. It says, what is the difference between micro and macro? Kyle gave us a definition for micro as small changes within the same species. The difference between micro and macro, this is the slide that was messed up. On the left-hand side, Ms. Carol, we have the amoeba to jellyfish, all the way up to some kind of ape man. And then on the right-hand side, we have a dog, and then we have various other dogs. Okay? So which is which? Which is micro and which is macro? Uh-huh. I agree. That's exactly right. Now, I think we said on Sunday, which one of those two would Darwin believe in? Both. He would believe in both, right? Yes, he would believe in both. All right, so again, macro is large-scale changes taking over a long period of time, leads to a new species formation. Micro, like Kyle said, is small-scale changes within the same species, produces new variations or species in a relevantly short period of time. So, Miss Carol, what we have up here is a cat sticking its paws into a fish tank. Okay? The fish are just like normal goldfish. Okay, so what's the cat trying to do? Catch the goldfish. Well, there's a little, anybody want to tell Miss Carol what it says in the bubble talk?
So the fish are conspiring with one another, saying, okay, on the count of 3, we all evolve into piranhas.
Yeah, does that happen in a short period of time? No. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. All right, would the below be a micro or macro? Ms. Carol, we have a fish walking out of the water, and then we have another fish in the water. And the one fish in the water is going, talking to the fish out of the water, saying, "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you." So is that an example of micro or macro? Fish into a walking fish. All right, that is macro. Has that ever been seen? Do we see a bunch of fish just walking out of water? No. Do we see a lot of amphibians just turning magically into reptiles? No. Do we see reptiles, all these different reptiles transitioning into birds? No. Do we see birds transitioning into mammals? No, but that is macroevolution. All right, here's your other example. You have this is the evolution of a snowman. You got one big round snow pile, and then in the next frame you have 2 snow piles on top of each other, and then in the next frame you have a nose and 2 eyes, and then you have some sticks as arms. And then the last frame is what, Jonathan? A puddle. The sun's out, Miss Carol. So the snowman melted. That's going to be micro, right? Microevolution. To change within the same snowman. Now, we also, I think, mentioned this. Why is it important that Christians know something about Darwin's evolution? And now, Ms. Carol, you had a great answer on Sunday. You want to kind of say that again?
So I can answer some people's questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I do that at home all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is slide that was messed up, I think, on Sunday. Effects of evolution. One of the main reasons our youth are leaving the church is that they cannot defend a belief in the Bible. What can be done? And it says up here, the Bible teaches what can be done. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to give what? An answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is within you with meekness and fear. And that's 1 Peter 3:15. The meaning of this particular scripture, we must understand what we believe. We must understand why we are Christians. We must be able to articulate this belief in a reasonable and biblical way. Now, I have another little cartoon up here, Miss Carol. Bear with me. It says, what is this cartoon trying to say? And what we have a teacher, and she has this square thought box, okay? And she has 4 students, and she's going with scissors, and she's changing their round thought box with her square thought box. So what do you think this is trying to say? Aaron?
Don't think outside of the box.
I never thought about that. That's good. I like that. I have another thing. Anybody else? This is what we had a discussion with my neighbor there today. I use my neighbor a lot just because he's a skeptic. And we have some interesting conversations. And we were battling back and forth. I guess you can call it battling. Back and forth. He was trying to give me these gotcha questions. Something about in Matthew, it didn't say that Mary was a virgin, that she was a young woman. So that's trying to catch me that, that wasn't a miracle. But one of the things he said that really got me upset, I didn't show that out, I don't think. Maybe I did. Hopefully I didn't. I was trying to be, what is it when you're talking with an unbeliever, Kyle? You're trying to be patient and meek. I was trying to be all those things, but he looked at me and he goes, you're indoctrinating your daughter. I'm indoctrinating my daughter. Okay. and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Because, yes, we believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in God, our Creator. And we come to services whenever the doors are open. And Sophie comes with us. And we pray all the time at home in Bible studies. And, yeah, God is the main focus in our family, the main focus. But I said, if you had a child, if you had a young person, would you not indoctrinate them into your life beliefs, your worldview, your morals and values? And he didn't really have an answer for that. Because I believe all young people, in a sense, are going to be, if you want to say indoctrinated, into their parents' worldview. My point, and the reason they left where they were in Oregon, I think I've told Kyle and Jonathan, and they left Portland, really, the city of Portland, because of all the craziness going on there. And the drug use, the homelessness, it's just crazy. They didn't feel safe. They drove all the way to Kentucky, Placid County, Blaze Valley Road, Red Barn Road, to get away from all that. And I said, my neighbor, if you take your worldview to its furthest conclusion, that's what you have in Portland. You have what you have in Portland because there's no higher. They don't believe in anything higher than themselves in that particular area. And so if you don't believe in a God, if you don't believe that hope for heaven, if you don't believe in eternal life, and all you care about is yourself, what you're going to get, then that's what you get in Portland. So I said, so you come all the way out here because you want to be in a place where it feels safe, and we still have Christian values.
That's why he feels safe.
Exactly. That's fairly exactly. That's why he feels safe.
You know, Robbie, his question though, it's one of the biggest struggles that I have with evolution. First of all, name me one person who's not been indoctrinated. You know, like as you're pointing out, indoctrination is just planting doctrine within someone's head. So either, you know, yes, you're indoctrinating your daughter. He is, you know, he was indoctrinated with his beliefs. But what that details is the capacity to grow and learn and change specifically. Evolution is all about change. That's the big thing with evolution, change. So what provided the capacity for the first change to begin? Because most evolutionists will, to your drawing that you had a minute ago, go back even before the amoeba to the bacterium. And what is a bacterium? It is a brainless cell. It is programmed by something, we don't know what, so we'll just say it just is. What indoctrinated it to become an amoeba? That's been my big struggle with the macroevolutionary view is it doesn't really give an answer, even as much as it thinks it does. It just, as this teacher kind of in your cartoon is doing, it just stops the questions.
Good point. All right, so it says interpret this cartoon. Ms. Carroll, we have a student and we have a teacher. The teacher is saying to the student, I see evolution happening in my lab. It's a fact. And what he's imagining is all these different butterflies. You know, all these different colored butterflies. You know, that's what he's imagining. The student, however, is not imagining butterflies. The student is imagining the amoeba to the fish all the way to him. All right? So that's what he's envisioning. So what do you think a bait and switch is? A bait and switch. This is a technique they sometimes use in arguments. When you're arguing with someone, they might use a bait and switch. Like if you go to a used car lot, and they have this nice
They advertise a nice
this
car.
nice Corvette, this nice red Corvette, and it's in prime shape. And you say, well, let me think about it. And you come back next day, and it's not the same. It's not the same at all. So a bait and switch. Darwinists typically use a bait and switch method when attempting to convince people of their theory. When using the word evolution as meaning small changes in the same species or population over time, they will then, Ms. Carroll, switch to major changes, whereas a species changes into totally different species. That's what they do. The unexpecting audience thus sees macro in their minds, while the actual laboratory evidence that is seen is ever and always only small, trivial variations. The two different terms exist because there is indeed a distinction. Why else bother? What use would such differences be if there really were no differences in reality? So again, I was talking to my neighbor and his wife one day, and he was going, oh, all these different species of apple trees and all the different types of apples. And she, the wife goes, isn't evolution marvelous? And I looked both of them, I said, isn't God marvelous? And then she goes, don't you believe in evolution? I said, define what you mean by evolution, you see, because she was wanting me to admit that I believed in macroevolution, and I told her I believe there's two different types of evolution. There's micro, and I believe in small changes within a species, but I do not believe that you could take some non-living material and eventually end up with different types of apple trees. Eric.
I once saw an illustration that I thought really showed the difference between micro and macroevolution very well. It's, with macroevolution, shows the tree of life. You've referred to it many times. Instead of a tree of life, we think of a forest. So God made many different kinds, and then we see small variations within each kind. So instead of a tree of life, we have a forest.
I like that. So many different within that same forest. Yeah. It's not just a tree here and then all of a sudden you get everything. Exactly. I like that. Thank you. So is evolution taught as fact or theory in the public school system and college? That would be as fact. In most, I would say all school systems, but I know that most public school systems and most universities teach it as fact.
You know, what's interesting in my experience with that has been, it is taught as theory.
They call it theory.
It's spoken of as theory, but they believe it as fact.
You're right.
And they expect that you will believe that as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're exactly. That's a bait switch.
Bait switch, yeah.
Bait switch. Yes, sir.
It's something I find interesting with macroevolution that's taught in schools. In the same textbook, and they talk about life coming from non-life. Right. But almost within the same chapter, and in fact it probably is within the same chapter, they will denigrate and put down, make fun of people who believed in the spontaneous generation. You take a box, you put some corn, you put some feed in, set out in the field, and all of a sudden mice spring up. But they make fun of that, but they will claim that life comes from non-life.
Exactly. We talked about biogenesis and abiogenesis. Abiogenesis means non-life to life. We've never seen that. And I know that one famous scientist used rotten meat. And you put rotten meat in, after so many days, all of a sudden there were maggots. It's like, where do these maggots come from? It's spontaneous generation is basically, like Aaron was saying, it's just life from non-life. And so that theory or that explanation fell through. It fell through really, really poorly. So look no further than our school textbooks as far as how it's taught in the public and in our universities. Also, the federal and state curriculum guidelines only mandates the theory of evolution be taught in the public schools. Now, I don't know for a fact, but I believe at one time Christianity was taught in the schools. I think this changed sometime in the 1900s, or was it in the 1800s?
I'm not sure that it was that far back, but yeah, it was changed.
It was changed. So who is the father of evolution?
I think it got started after the Scopes monkey trial.
And that happened in the early 50s? Yeah, no, I think it was in it could have been in the 30s or 40s, something like that. Scopes, the monkey trial, Miss Carroll, was a teacher, a science teacher, was trying to teach evolution in his school. And
1925.
When was it?
1925.
1925, and he was sued and taken to court, and actually I think he lost. But from that point forward, evolution started to be taught in the public school systems. The Scopes monkey trial. There's a movie that Spencer Tracy is actually the lawyer for the teacher. That was one time I was against Spencer Tracy. He was one of my favorite actors. All right, who is the father of evolution? Darwin. Miss Carroll, what we have up here is we have Darwin, a picture of Darwin, and he's got his finger in front of his mouth, like he's going shh. There's a reason for that. We'll come back to that later. So Charles Darwin, of course, he came up with his famous book, The Origin of Species. And what is this? Oh, and what does it mean? All right, Miss Carol, what we have up here is we have a bunch of scribbling. It looks like, well, someone describe what that might be.
Kind of like a tree.
It is. It is a tree. And then they're scribbling over here like some kind of writing that can't make out. But then over here, what is on the left-hand side, there's what? I think. So basically, this is Darwin's actual drawing of the tree of life and what he thought it would look like. This Darwin's first drawing of what he thought the tree of life would look like, and he has, I think. I think that might be it. So Charles Darwin was just 28 years old when in 1837 he scribbled in a notebook, one species does change into another. One species does change into another. That's what he said when he was 28 years old. That's interesting. I don't know if he just, he said it. No evidence for that, but he said it. So what is the general theory of evolution? Anybody know the general theory of evolution?
Gradual change over time.
Change over time? Yep.
It's the micro or a macro evolution.
Macroevolution?
Stretch through a common ancestor,
What's that?
or I guess development through a common ancestor.
Development, evolving from a common ancestor. So it says, what is the general theory of evolution, or macroevolution, or Darwin evolution, commonly called the general theory of evolution? And what is it? Now, John J. Williams, in his book, defends Darwinian evolution as, and I have this underlined, the hypothesis that millions of years ago, lifeless matter acted upon by natural forces gave origin to minute living organisms, which have since produced all extinct and living plants and animals, including man. That is the general theory of evolution based on John J. Williams. A hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? When Jonathan and Aaron do experiments in their class, they always have their students form a hypothesis. A hypothesis. I think we mentioned Sunday that in the scientific method you have a question, and then you research that question, and then you form a hypothesis. And then you do what with that hypothesis? You test it. And after you test it, you've got all this stuff you got to look at. It's called analyzing the data. And after you analyze the data, you do what? You draw a conclusion. And I think we said on Sunday that evolutionists, they do the question and the hypothesis, then they skip right to a conclusion. See, a hypothesis is what you think. It's neither proven or disproven. It's what you think. If this is what evolution is based on, a hypothesis, then it's definitely not a theory. It takes more than just a hypothesis to make a theory, and it's definitely not a fact. This is sometimes referred to as particles to people, this evolution. Particles, like little cells, to people. It's also known as monkey to man. And I like this one, atom to atom. Atom, A-T-O-M. Yes, exactly. The two ideas proposed by Charles Darwin were, first, populations and species, Aaron, you said this, change over time. And second, inherited traits help organisms to survive. These are the main two proponents of Charles Darwin's evolution. He proposed these two ideas to explain evolution. The first one is that populations and species change over time because the conditions of the environments let them change to adapt in the best way in an environment. Now, the question is that true? Do populations and species change over time because the conditions of the environment lets them change to adapt the best way to their environment?
Absolutely.
Exactly, it does. There's no controversy in that at all. That is seen. We can test that. We can actually have a hypothesis, test it, analyze, draw a conclusion. Also, that certain organisms pass inherited traits to their offspring because they manage to survive and produce. Therefore, their offspring will inherit these traits to guarantee survival, and some of them even develop a new change that will improve the survival of its offspring. So these two ideas define how a species developed to adapt. Does that sound controversial? Not really. Nope. Many believe that the modern idea of evolution only began with Charles Darwin in 1959 when he published The Origin of Species. But many falsely conclude that evolutionary doctrine was some grand new budding scientific discovery born out of the post-Enlightenment era, the Industrial Revolution, and the Age of Reason during the past 150 years. But not so. Believe it or not, Ms. Carroll, atheists and Greek philosophers have proposed the non-scientific hypothesis for centuries. Not until Darwin's writing, however, were any of these individuals taken seriously. So this wasn't a new idea. And actually, many ancient philosophers proposed that complex biological beings evolved from simpler ones and or from non-living matter. This is ancient philosophers. Philosophers. Why would this idea be proposed by these ancient philosophers?
Because we don't like we don't like the current answer.
We don't like the current answer.
We've got to come up with a new one.
We have to come up with something better because we don't want to have to answer to anything. We don't want to have to answer to a God. So we got to come up with something different. Something we can feel comfortable with in what we do in our life, right? Ancient philosophers felt this way. Is that kind of the notion today? Yes, most definitely. Ms. Carroll says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's Psalms 14:1 and 53:1. This is an alternative to divine creation that was needed. So these ancient philosophers decided they better come up with something different because they were foolish, right?
You know, Roy, what's so interesting about that is I imagine you ask most people today about evolution, and their minds immediately go to Charles Darwin.
Oh, yeah.
When in fact most scientists who believe in evolution won't even call it Darwinianism. They may use neo-Darwinianism and various other things because they're regularly proving each one of them wrong, and so they have to change the name to define now what we believe. But it's almost as if somebody in the other room in there said, I think the sky's purple. No, that's ridiculous. But then somebody else said, well, no, I think the sky is purple. And it just systematically keeps getting ignored. No one's listening to them. And finally, someone says it loud enough and has enough authority behind them. And everybody goes, that's the father of the doctrine of purple sky. And it spreads from there. But, we start testing it and go, well, one, we can't test it. And we can spit that one, but we can't test this theory. So we have to start making changes to it. This is bait and switch again. There is a significant fact that is overlooked whenever you say Darwin came up with this. Darwin taught us this. Well, for almost 1,500 years, well, I guess longer than that, for over 2,000 years, people have been saying biological evolution happened, and nobody listened to them because they didn't find it believable. Why have we all of a sudden changed? Did we just get so smart all of a sudden?
That's a good point.
I think that's an interesting thing that comes from the realization Darwin wasn't the first to publish this.
That's a good point. That is an excellent point. This is a quote from Charles Darwin. It says, "It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one's most responsive to change." One's most responsive to change. So, I have up here, I have an S with a line under it, of the, and F with a line under it. What do you think this is supposed to be saying? Survival of the fittest. Is that a controversial phrase? If you have a dog and you have a squirrel, like my Australian Shepherd loves to chase squirrels, and if my Australian Shepherd can catch the squirrel, guess who's going to survive and not survive? So is there any controversy in survival of the fittest? Of course not. So up here I have survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest refers to natural process resulting in the evolution of organisms that make them acquire a better design. I love that, better design. That is fit to the environment. And then we have survival of the fittest is a phrase actually not coined by Darwin. It was coined by Herbert Spencer, which inspired by the Darwinian evolutionary theory. Later, Darwin adopted that phrase in his published works in Origin of Species. So Darwin didn't even come up with that phrase. It was actually this other gentleman. Natural selection. Natural selection, you've heard of that? Natural selection, the process whereby organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and produce what? Offspring. The theory of its action was first fully expounded by Charles Darwin and is now believed to be the main process that brings about evolution compared with survival of, again, the fittest. Natural selection translated survival of the survivors or the fittest of the fit. And what we have up here, Ms. Carol, we have two giraffes that have really short necks. And then we have one giraffe with a really long neck. And beside the ones with the short necks, they have X's. And beside the one that has the long neck, there's a check. Survival of the fittest. The giraffe with the long neck would survive. All right? And then we have you have a big fish eating this smaller fish, and the smaller fish eating this other smaller fish. Survival of the fittest. Now I like this example. What we have here, Miss Carol, we have a bunch of deer living in a warm, let's see, it says these deer live in a warm climate. Some have thicker fur than the others. So they're in a warm climate. Some have thicker fur than others. And then they move. And some of the deer become separated from the rest of the group. And all of a sudden they're in a cold mountain climate. All right? So these deer with the thicker fur are most likely to survive, whereas the ones with the thinner fur die out. And then the last caption is, as years pass, each generation has a greater proportion of deer with thick fur. After many generations, most deer have thick fur. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. Is that evolution?
It is microevolution.
It is microevolution. It's not macro. We didn't have deer changing into polar bears. Okay? So, I mean, this happens. And if you want to give Charles Darwin the credit for maybe coming up with a term that we do have change over time, survival of the fittest, but this does not prove macroevolution in the least. Yes?
And the class that I taught that Sunday, that this influenced other people like Nietzsche and then eventually Hitler.
Yeah.
This is natural. This occurs. But when you have a macro view, we cannot progress if those inferior, deer that don't have the thick enough fur, if they're allowed to stay in the population and mix with other deer that have thick fur. So you have thin and thick. And if we want to survive and we want to grow into our greater being, we have to cut out the weak link. And that's, when you see it as microevolution, you recognize we don't change. We're just, there's just people that are more suited to cold weather. But when you view it in the form of macroevolution, that these things must occur for greater changes and greater evolution of mankind to occur, you start to see where somebody like Hitler going, well, I have deemed this trait despicable, and if it's going to continue to populate within our society, we need to cull it. We need to get it out of the way so we can continue on our evolution. And I don't think anyone, Charles Darwin, I don't think anyone had that sort of, and you could argue Hitler was a psycho, but he was taking it to his logical conclusion.
Exactly.
And I don't think anyone thought that far ahead.
Yeah, they credit Adolf Hitler, as using Darwin's evolution to basically for his cause. Yes, Aaron.
Well, you had a big movement at that time, at the turn of the 20th century. We had social Darwinism, we also had eugenics.
Yeah.
And eugenics was, there was a big movement in this country with eugenics. You had eugenics boards in every county. And they would deem, I think you mentioned it, Kyle, about certain undesirables couldn't marry, they would force sterilization, do all sorts of awful things. And from different things I've seen, Hitler got his ideas from this country and the things that were promoted.
It's been interesting to me. We live where we are for 30 years, back up to Pittman Creek and along the woods and stuff. We've had as many as 40 turkeys there at different times. But over that period of time, I've noticed several times that there'll be a small hen. She never grows. It's like the others or whatever, and they drive her out. They will not let her stay with them.
Wow.
And she stays out there roaming around by herself. They usually don't last more than a couple of years like that. But they actually are thinning it out because they know she's not productive.
Yeah, that's a good example within a species. Yeah, the weakest out. All right, Miss Carol, what I have up here is I have a big shark, and he's about 4 foot from this guy named Tony. And this is natural selection. And then there's dum 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 dum. This is survival of the fittest, right? All right. So what main function do organisms use to help their species survive? There's one word. What main function do organisms use to help their species survive? One word. Starts with an R.
Reproduction.
Reproduction. Reproduction is that. What does the Bible say about how all the different animals and plants survive? And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, herb that yields seeds, the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind. These seeds, the seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so. Genesis 1:11. God also created the sea creatures and the birds according to their kind, and the land animals each according to their kind. Genesis 1:21-24. The key concept in these scriptures is that each kind reproduces after its own kind. The offspring are similar to their parents. They are also fertile and can only mate with others of the same kind, producing offspring that look similar to their ancestors. Plants, trees, fish, birds, reptiles, insects, mammals reproduce consistently after their own kind. Apple trees don't produce orange. The cattle don't produce sheep. Inherent within the genes of these kinds is a variety that will come out in a continuous generations as demonstrated by dog breeding and variations within other animals, plants, birds, fish. This is God ordained, right? This is God created. This is what we see. We see this every single day. We don't see the macroevolution. We've never seen it. We don't, like Don said, we've never seen the transitional fossils. There should be millions of these different fossils, and we don't see any of it. But we do see species producing like species.
So once again, the forest versus the tree.
Exactly. Aaron, I love that analogy. What do we call the different, is the second one?
No.
Okay. What do we call the different characteristics all plants and animals have within each individual cell? We call that traits. Heard of that term, traits? Traits are basically physical characteristics. A trait is, as related to genetics, is a specific characteristic of an individual. Traits can be determined by genes, environmental factors, or by a combination of both. Examples would be eye color, hair color, and height. And I have an example of a polar bear up here, thick fur. A porcupine has its quills. A giraffe has a long neck. This young lady says hi. She has brown hair. An elephant has a long trunk. And tree grow roots. These are traits. Now, I want to see if you guys can figure this out, and then we'll call it a class. Ms. Carroll says traits are found on DNA. I'm sorry, genes. I got too far, Jonathan. Traits are found on genes. I'm sorry. I've got the answer within the next sentence, Ms. Carroll. I went one sentence too far. All right. So traits are found on genes. Genes or chromosomes are located on the DNA. DNA contains information. Information comes from intelligence. Intelligence comes from a intelligent designer. We know that intelligent designer as
God.
All right, I think that will do it for me. Thank you guys for your attention. I think the slides worked out a little better.
No purple cabbage.
No purple cabbage.
No purple cabbage tonight.